Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And Happy New Year, everyone! We're glad you decided to join us this morning. Today, we are going to be exploring the world of invertebrates. And as we explore together, we welcome you to participate along with us. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, observations that you would like to share with us, we would love to hear it. Because I am actually, while I'm here at the aquarium, I'm in a special studio. And what you're seeing on the screen behind me is being controlled by my other friend in the studio, Soraya. And she's able to respond to any questions and text messages that you type in. So you can go ahead and contact us live during this program at area code 562-286-1838. And that is a number that you can text us anytime. We will get it live during this program as we're doing it, and we'll be happy to answer those questions live during the program or respond to you by text message. However, if you're watching this from our YouTube channel or you're doing this at any other time other than, what are we on, January 9th already today, at 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, then you can email us any questions that you have to live@lbaop.org. LB stands for Long Beach, AOP, aquariumofpacific.org. And we'll have an educator respond to you at a later time. So either way, we'd love to hear from you today and see what kind of thoughts you have about this program. Now, as I mentioned, we're talking about invertebrates. So first of all, let's define what this word means. So invertebrate, do you have an idea what an invertebrate is? Have you heard that word before? Maybe you've heard it. If you've watched any of our programs, I'm sure you have. But let's take away, first of all, this, let's see if I can turn my hand and block it. Okay, now my head is blocking the other part. There we go. Soraya makes it easier for me. We took out that IN, and let's look at this word vertebrate. Vertebrate. That is an animal that has vertebrae. Well, do you know what vertebrae are? Well, you can check. Take your hands, put them behind your back, and go up and down the middle of your back. Do you feel those little bumps? If you can feel bumps in your back, those are vertebrae. Vertebrae are the little backbones. Maybe you've heard it referred to as a spine or your backbone. But your backbone is actually not just one long bone. It's a series of little bones called vertebrae, all stacked up on top of each other. So any animal that has vertebrae, like we do, are called vertebrates. So you and I are vertebrates. So go ahead and say it right now. Say, I am a vertebrate. You say it? I am a vertebrate. That's right. You and I are both vertebrates. However, we're focusing on the animals that are not vertebrates, which we call invertebrates. So an invertebrate has no vertebrae. So what do you think life would be like if you had no bones? No bones, no problems for these invertebrates, because right here behind me is a perfect example of some invertebrates that live in the ocean. What animals are these? I'm sure you recognize them. Yeah, did you say jellyfish? You probably did. Or maybe you said sea jellies. I like that. Sea jellies are invertebrates. They have no bones. They also have no brain and no heart. But they get along quite well without them in the ocean. Now, you and I would not survive without our backbones, but invertebrates that are made like this, they have some other pretty cool adaptations that help them to survive. Now, if you think about it, if you don't have bones, it makes sense that you'd be kind of soft and squishy, kind of like sea jellies are, very soft and squishy. Let's even just look at how they move. How they move through the water is very different than how you and I move. We've got our legs and our bones that move and muscles that help us move and walk. They don't really have that. They're just kind of floating and drifting through the ocean. In fact, sea jellies are considered plankton. Have you heard that term before? Well, plankton, we oftentimes think of as something being very, very small. And while that is true, that many times plankton are very, very small, some are actually quite large, like sea jellies. In fact, the largest sea jelly can grow to be 100 feet long, the lion's mane sea jelly, and yet they are still considered plankton, because plankton is not defined by size, but rather something that can swim against an ocean current. So basically, if the water is flowing this way, guess where the animal is going to go? It's going to go that way too. But if it can swim against an ocean current, like say a whale or a dolphin or a shark or other bigger fish, if they can swim against a current, they're not considered. But anything that's really small and tiny in the water, it's not going to be able to swim against plankton or against a current, so it would be safe to call that plankton. So jellies right here are an example of plankton. They're just ocean drifters. So very nice and easy way of life, right? But hard to get around. Well, let's think about some other examples of invertebrates. Can you think of any? If you can think of some, go ahead and text us in at that number that you'll see on your screen in just a moment. And tell me if you can think of any other animals in the ocean, or maybe that don't have bones. Can you think of anything else that might be squishy, like a sea jelly? What about, I can think of some animals that like to crawl on their bellies, but they have no bones. So that's kind of why they have to crawl on their bellies. No, I'm not talking about snakes. Snakes actually have bones too. They can slither and slide, but they have bones helping them move. But there are other things that are long and skinny that don't have bones, like worms. Worms are an example of an animal that's an invertebrate. What about a slug? Yeah, there's even sea slugs in the ocean, and even other animals that look like slugs called sea cucumbers. So this one right here is called a sea cucumber. No, it is not the type of cucumber you would put in your salad. Very different. This is an animal, but it is an animal that has no bones. However, look at the outside of its body. It has something else to protect it. What does it look like this one has? It looks like it has spikes, doesn't it? Does it look like this would be very comfortable to touch? It looks like, if you touch this, you'd probably get hurt, like the thorns on the side of a rose bush or something. But guess what? This sea cucumber, it is a master of disguise here because these are not actually sharp. These are really soft. So if you were to touch the sea cucumber, you would feel that its whole body is really soft and have hard spikes all over its body. It's a decoy. So it kind of fools things to make them think, oh, you don't want to mess with me, because if you do, you might get hurt. Well, you wouldn't really get hurt. However, this sea cucumber has an amazing adaptation that you and I don't have, because this is an animal that can regrow, or what we call regenerate, parts of its body. So if an animal does try to be brave and try to eat the sea cucumber does something totally disgusting. Do you want to know what it is? Okay. They can actually throw up their guts, spit their guts out all over the animal trying to eat it, and then the sea cucumber can get away and grow those inside parts right back again. It's pretty impressive, don't you think? So, I mean, they have cousins. Their cousins are called sea stars. You've probably heard of them too. And maybe you know that if you were to, chop off the arm of a sea star, it can grow its arm back, which is also regeneration and also very impressive and also something you and I can't do. But a sea star can regrow its arm. I think it's way more impressive, though, that a sea cucumber can grow back their guts. So pretty impressive animals, these invertebrates that live under the sea. Now, this sea star here also has some pretty cool adaptations. What do you notice about it? How is it sticking to this window here? We're looking at the underside of a sea star. Now, where their mouth is also a little bit different. If we think about an invertebrate and maybe where their faces are, where's the face of a sea star? Where's their mouth? Where are their eyes? Do they have a nose even? Well, right here in the center is their mouth. So right on the underside where all of their arms come together, they have a mouth. Now, they don't really have regular eyes, but they do have on the end of each arm, they have basically something that allows them to see. So their eyes are on the end of each arm. So they have one on the end of each arm. So how many eyes does this sea star have? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arms, which means they have one on the end of each arm. They have 5 eyes. So it's the very last foot on the end of each arm that has an eye. Now you're like, wait a minute, feet on their arms. Can you imagine if we had feet on our arms? Instead of having hands on the end, we had feet and we walked on our feet. That's what sea stars have. They have all these amazing tube feet right here that can help them to stick. Pretty impressive. Our feet can't help us to stick, but they can help them stick onto rocks, and they also help them move. But the very last one on each arm is a very special tube foot because it has an eye that can help them see. Now, some sea stars, they can only see the difference between light and dark, kind of like if you were to close your eyes put your hands over your eyes, and then keeping your eyes closed, take your hands off, and you'll notice you can tell it gets a little bit lighter. Well, that's how some sea stars are able to see, whereas other sea stars can use those last 2 feet, on the last 2 foot on each arm, to actually see images. They can see very low quality picture images. Think about if you take a really bad picture with a digital camera and it's all pixelated and you can't see it very well, but you can still make out an image. That's kind of how some sea stars are able to see. So it's pretty impressive. They have eyes on their feet. And watch how this sea star moves. Did you ever think about how a sea star moves? I know we think about those 5 long arms they have, but many times we assume that they kind of pick up and walk like this. But they don't. Notice how this sea star is moving. Because all their feet are all over the underside of their body, they actually glide along the bottom of the seafloor, just like you see this one doing. Pretty impressive. Well, sea stars are something you're familiar with, and I bet there's a lot of other invertebrates that you're familiar with too. Maybe you've even seen them if you've watched on the beach, if you've ever gone to a vacation spot and you've been lucky enough to go to a beach. Maybe you've even seen some of these on the beach yourself. I have, over on my document camera, I have some special pictures of some very special types of animals. And you may have seen something like this in a tide pool, which would be the areas that are close to the shore where there's lots of rocks, where the water comes in, the tide, when it's high tide, it covers over all of them. And then when the water goes out, it becomes low tide and creates these little pools that some animals might be a little bit more exposed to the sun and you might be able to see really well. You could find animals like this, like sea stars and anemones. Have you heard of anemones before or thought about them? You've ever seen Finding Nemo? Nemo lives in a sea anemone. Well, here's a sea anemone that's all opened up with all of its tentacles sticking out. And then one right here, this is actually the same anemone, but it's all closed up. So this, or I should say, it's also an anemone. So this is an anemone that's closed and it's hiding all of those crazy looking tentacles that look like crazy hair. It's hiding them on the inside. And all that's exposed is the outside part of its body here called the mantle or the column of the anemone. So those are kind of neat animals. But let me go over here to my camera and see if you recognize some of these shapes or some of these things that are on here. We'll switch that over for you in just a second. All right, now look at these for a little bit. Do you recognize anything here? Because this is all an example, an assortment of different types of invertebrates. Now, these are not invertebrates that are alive anymore, of course, but did you realize every time you see a shell on the beach, you're actually looking at evidence of a living animal? There was an animal that made those shells. These shells don't just magically appear in the sand on the beach. These were houses for living animals. Now, what kinds do you recognize? Are there any shapes that you see that maybe you've seen before? Or some that maybe you have no idea what they are? Like, I don't know, I've never seen this. Well, let's go ahead and start with this one. This one right here. Do you notice this? What would you call this? Probably call it a shell, right? Do you think of this as being a clam? Well, it's very similar because a clam does have 2 shells that come together and the animal lives inside that hard casing. As the animal grows, its shell grows. So this is one of those, what we call a bivalve animal, where it is also, I'm going to give you another term, it's called a mollusk. Try saying that with me, mollusk. Mollusk. So a mollusk is a soft-bodied animal, and because it has a soft body on the inside or all over it, it has to have something to protect that soft body. So since they don't have bones, they have instead a hard shell on the outside to protect that soft body on the inside. And a lot of times we see something like this and we think, oh, that's a clam. But this is actually an animal called a scallop. Have you heard that term before? Maybe you've even eaten scallops before and you didn't even know what you were eating. Or maybe your parents have been eating scallops and they didn't know what they were eating. So this is a scallop, and you can tell it has these long lines. Do you see these long lines that are coming out like rays from the center, from the bottom of the shell? Well, a scallop is kind of like that, kind of like your hand, where the rays, the lines go out to the edges from the center. Whereas if we look down here, look at this one. This one is a little bit different. See how this one also has lines? and they kind of come around the outside edge, like they go like an outline around the shell of the animal. This one is a clam shell. So a clam and a scallop are both bivalves, bi meaning two, like a bicycle has two wheels. They have two shells that close like this, and they protect the animal inside of them. And the animal inside of them is all soft and mushy. And if you've ever had clam chowder, you've eaten something that comes from this animal right here. Nobody ever chews the hard shell. That's not good. We want to get to the animal on the inside. That's what people like to eat in clam chowder. But if you've ever had scallops, this is the shell that's protecting that type of animal. But there are other shells here too. What other shells do you notice? See this one? Oh, this one's really pretty. In fact, let me kind of bring it out so you can see it better. Let me turn the lighting on. Maybe this will make it easier too. So this shell is really, really smooth. And if I turn it over to the underside, look at that funny shape that it has. It's almost like it has these little teeth. Well, this is not a mouth, my friends. This right here is where the body of the animal can hide inside when they need to. But this animal has a long, skinny body, again, that's very soft, and it moves along its body. This is a type of a snail called a cowrie. Now, there's many different types of cowries, and locally here in Southern California, we have a type of cowrie called a chestnut cowrie. So here we have a picture of it for you right here. You can see a little bit more about what makes this animal so special. So see how it has a smooth shell right here, and it's kind of that chestnut color, that chestnut brown color, which is why it's called a chestnut cowrie. And these don't get very big. They get maybe about that size. But what else do you see? Do you notice this orange thing here and this orange thing here? It almost look like tusks hanging down like a walrus. Well, these are not tusks. These are also very soft. But think about a snail, and a lot of times we picture snails like the land snails in our head, right? They have this long, soft body that they glide across, and then they've got that round shell on top, and then on the top of their head, they have those two long antennae. That's what you were looking at on the chestnut cowrie. So those are two little antennae that they have right down here that help them feel around and see and understand their environment a little bit more. So this is the head of the chestnut cowrie right here. And I also want you to note these polka dots. Do you see those spots on their body? Well, this is not part of their shell. This is their shell, but remember how we said it's really smooth, and look at how shiny it is. You can see the reflection of the light hitting it. So it's a very smooth and shiny shell, and the reason for that is because of these polka dots. These polka dots help you to see where the mantle is, all right? A new scientific word, the mantle. The mantle is what produces the shell for the snail. And as this snail grows, that mantle is going to produce more shell and help it create to help kind of shine it. It can polish. It's also a big polisher. So this mantle can actually close over the whole top of the shell so that this animal might look kind of spotted with little polka dots all over it and kind of dull and muted. But that's only because the mantle is covering it. And it's polishing and smoothing the shell and repairing any little cracks or cuts or nicks that they might have in their shell. So cowries always are beautiful and shiny because of this mantle that they use to cover their body. But if you go up to one at a touch pool, or even one of our touch pools here at the aquarium, and you touch a chestnut cowrie that has the mantle on, you know what the chestnut cowrie will do? They'll go bloop, and they'll bring all that mantle underneath them so you don't see it anymore. And it'll be all brought to the underside right here, like on my chest or on my cowrie shell that I'm holding. It'll bring all of that inside. So normally it covers over the outside right here. And then when it gets scared, it'll bring it down into here and hide, just along with the rest of its body. So snails can bring their bodies underneath their shells and kind of hide inside of them. But if you ever see a long one like this, you'll know that this is a cowrie shell. Now there's also another snail shell that I have over here in my document camera. Let's see, do you see anything else that looks like it could belong to a snail? Well, if you saw this one here that's kind of on the outside, this also belongs to a snail. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, isn't that from a hermit crab? Oh, I like what you're thinking, because hermit crabs are another type of invertebrate. But a hermit crab, unlike other species of crabs, they don't make their own hard shell to protect them. So they have to find another shell that's no longer being used by an animal so that they can hide and protect themselves inside that shell. So many times hermit crabs will use something like this, like a turban snail. So this is a shell from a turban snail, like what I'm holding here. And it looks like it's got this really cool, like a pyramid, kind of a triangle shape on the side. But if you look from the top, it's a round circle. So it's like a turban that's coming up like this. But if you were to look on the inside of it, they actually have, it's almost like a spiral staircase without the steps. So this and this are the same thing. What I'm holding here is the shell of a turban snail. This is also the shell of a turban snail, but this one, all the outer parts have broken, and you can see the structure on the inside. It looks kind of like a spiral, doesn't it? So this is, in the spiral area, is where all the body parts of that snail would be. And when it wants to hide, it just brings in its body and its long sticky foot, and it puts it inside here, and they even have a little door that closes over it called an operculum. An operculum, another fun scientific word. But here you can see the outside of the snail shell. But then when the snail dies, they leave this hard shell behind. And that is when a hermit crab might take over. So when they find that there's an empty shell and the animal's no longer alive, they'll come in, they'll clean it out, and they'll take it over and put their own body inside the shell and then crawl around with it. So yes, if you see an animal like this, if you see a shell like this, it could either be taken over by a hermit crab. If you see little legs sticking out of it and you see it walking around, it's a hermit crab. If instead you see this like slimy thing and it doesn't really look like legs, then that is the original owner of the shell. And this right here is called a Kellett's whelk. A Kellett's whelk is a type of a snail as well. They also have kind of a spiral shape on the inside of their body, but they have a really soft body with an operculum, and you can actually kind of see it here. So that darker color that you see right there is actually really hard. It's kind of like the same material as the shell, but it's attached to their underside, to their body, so that when they pull their underside inside that shell, all that is left is this shape that perfectly fits the doorway, you could say, of their shell, so it can be protected on the inside. So if you ever pick up a shell that you see on the beach and you notice that it's all closed up, you don't see any legs sticking out, you don't see any soft body parts, you're like, oh, it looks like it has a door. That means the animal's still inside and it's trying to hide from you. So go ahead and put that one back in the water so it can continue on and crawl away to safety. All right, so those are some really interesting snails. Now there's also another type of snail. If you see this shell right here, this one's kind of unique because it has these holes right here. See, there's 1, 2, 3 open holes, and then it looks like there's also some holes that have been filled in. Can you see those? So these filled in holes used to be open holes like this, but this is from an animal called an abalone. An abalone is a type of marine snail, and let me show you something really cool. This is the outside of their shell. This is the inside. So they have a really pretty coloring on the inside. I don't know how well you can see it with my lighting. I wonder if it's easier to see without my light. So they have sometimes some really pretty colors in here, but it's really shiny. And if you've ever heard of mother of pearl, that comes from the iridescent shell, the inside shell of an abalone. And unlike the clam or the scallop that has 2 shells, the abalone just has 1 shell, and it lives underneath it just like a snail. And I think we probably have a picture somewhere of an abalone. Here we go, that you can see. So here's abalone in action. There are those exposed little holes, and then here's the body of the abalone. So it looks kind of frilly on the outside edges, and it has these long things sticking out. These are also little sensory tentacles here, and they are really cool because they crawl. They can stick really well with their very big sticky foot. But why do you think they have these holes? What do you think those holes are for? Well, they're not their nose, but think about, if this animal, it lives underwater, it has to breathe. It breathes through these holes. So yes, snails have to breathe, animals have to breathe too, even if they're living underwater, but they use, just like what fish have, they use gills to help them breathe. So their gills are located underneath where these holes are. And so they are getting oxygen from the water and breathing through these holes. So these holes help them breathe. But these holes also help them get rid of their waste. So when they need to use the bathroom, all the waste is coming right out these holes. The same thing that they breathe through. Kind of weird, huh? Kind of gross. I'm kind of glad I'm not an abalone. Well, the neat thing is these abalone, these right here happen to be red abalone, but we actually are helping abalone right here at the Aquarium of the Pacific by growing a little bigger, and then we work with other special institutions that are helping put these abalone back out into the ocean again. Because white abalone were a type of abalone that were really endangered along our coast. In fact, we thought they were going to go extinct because their numbers got so low. So we've been helping to breed and grow abalone and helping them get bigger and bigger until we can put them back out into the ocean and cause their numbers to go back up to healthy abalone populations that we used to have off our coast here in. So that's an Aquarium of the Pacific is involved with. And so it's always fun when we get to see abalone and how they're doing in our exhibits, how they're living, because they're such unusual creatures that we don't usually think much about, but they're still pretty cool. So if you ever see that shell that has these like series of holes kind of around the outside, you're looking at an abalone shell. Just flip it over on the inside and you'll see how beautiful they are. But here's one right in the middle. This one also has a hole, but this hole is not the same type of thing. This one, have you seen something like this before? This is not from a shell of a mollusk, the soft-bodied animal on the inside. This is actually more closely related to a sea star. So a sea star or the sea cucumber that we were talking about at the beginning, this one is from a sea urchin. Do you know what an urchin is? Yeah, those big purple balls with the spikes for them that look like something you would not want to step on. In fact, you would not want to step on these guys. That could be a very painful experience because look at all those spikes. It'd be like sitting on a big round ball of toothpicks. That also wouldn't feel very good. Now, fortunately, the purple sea urchin, like the one you're seeing here, they don't have any toxins in their spines. They're not venomous animals, but you would still want to be careful when you touch them. But yes, you could gently pick one up and you could hold one because those spines don't have any venom that would be harmful to you, but you wouldn't want them to break off inside your skin because that would still hurt. But each one of these spikes, look at how many spikes they have all over their body. They're all over. They're on the top, they're on the sides, they're even on the bottom. If we go back to that picture of our sea urchin, of that little what we call a test. So the shell of a sea urchin is what we call the test. Look at this. What do you notice? Do you see those little circles and those little bumps? So all over the sea urchin's body, let me come over here and show it to you. You can see these bumps. Well, these are where those long spines were attached. Isn't that cool? Here, let's take a closer look. Oops, if I get it to the right spot. Let's focus, give it a second. Hopefully it'll focus. There we go. So you might see those big bumps. That's where one of those long spines was attached. But do you also see those little tiny holes in between them? Those little tiny holes is where their tube feet were attached. Remember how we were talking about the tube feet of the sea star? Well, urchins have tube feet too, and each one of those little tiny holes is where one of those tube feet were. Now remember what we said tube feet were used for. Tube feet on a sea star were used for obviously helping them move, but they're also used to help them breathe. And so it makes sense that they would have that little hole, that opening on the inside. Oh, and here's a close-up picture so you can see some more of these urchins and things in between. Those are the tube feet. They kind of look like hairs. Do you see them right up here? So these things that look like little hairs in between the spines are their tube feet. Now the tube feet of a sea urchin are really long because they need to be long enough to get out past those spines if they want to reach and hold on to something, right? So they might try to reach out and grab onto some seaweed or kelp that they like to munch on, or they might even try to hold some snail shells and things on top of them to help them hide and protect themselves from the sun when they're out in the tide pools and the tide is gone exposed to the sunlight. So here you can see some. Oh, you can even see them moving their tube feet around. Can you look and see this? Yeah, look at these right here. You can see the tube feet moving. They might be looking for food. They're like, I think there's food in the water. I'm ready to grab it, but they don't see very well, so they have to kind of feel for their food. And then they can bring it to the underside where their mouth is. So they do have a little mouth on the underside of their body with 5 little teeth that will help them munch on that kelp. All right, well, I realize we've already run out of time, so we need to wrap things up here. But thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about these invertebrates. No bones, no problem. They have so many other cool adaptations. And I hope you think twice when you see an animal like this up on the beach and you realize that this is not just a shell created by the ocean. This was actually evidence of a living animal. And see if you can try to figure out what kind of living animal it was that made that shell. Was it from a sea urchin? Was it from a scallop? Was it from a clam? Or, boy, there's even corals if you're in a warm tropical area. Those could be from coral reefs. Or maybe it was a snail, like an abalone here with these here, or a turban snail, like we talked about. So many different types of invertebrates live in the sea, and there's so many tide pool treasures. So I hope you get a chance to explore and discover some of them on your own someday. And anytime you want to visit and explore some of them here at the aquarium, we'd look happy to see, or we'd look happy. We look forward. But thank you for joining us today from the comfort of your own home or your screen where you're watching. And thank you for joining us for Aquarium Online Academy today. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.